Friends, greetings and welcome to this video. I have a comparison for you between the Samsung Galaxy S24 Fe and the OnePlus 13R. Two devices that are often compared in terms of specifications and price. They're basically phones with high-performance processors, but at a mid-range price. Let's first talk about the physical aspects of these devices because they are quite similar. The hand feel is very similar. Both have rounded edges and are very thin when viewed from the sides. The feeling in the hand is also quite similar. One thing that stands out to me about the OnePlus is that it has the slider to put the phone on silent, vibrate, or sound. Both have the volume buttons and the power button on the same side, which in my opinion is convenient because you can control it with just one hand. The OnePlus has an IR blaster that allows you to control your TV and other electronics, which is an added value. And of course, it has a USB Type-C port and stereo speakers. In terms of display, the OnePlus has an LTPO AMOLED with 120Hz refresh rate and can reach up to 1,600 nits of brightness, with a maximum of 4,500 nits. The Samsung comes with dynamic AMOLED and 120Hz refresh rate and can reach up to 1,900 nits of brightness. You'll see here examples side by side, playing videos on these devices in full sunlight. In my opinion, the brightness is quite similar, and at times I even thought the Samsung was a little brighter, but the experience is very similar. Both devices have a screen size of 6.7 inches, but in terms of resolution, the OnePlus has 1264 by 2772 pixels compared to 1080 by 2400 on the Samsung. I don't think you'll notice the difference between them, but in terms of numbers, the OnePlus has a slightly better resolution. Another advantage of the OnePlus is that it comes with Android 15, while the Samsung comes with Android 14. In terms of the processor, the OnePlus has the Qualcomm Snapdragon 8 Gen 3, while the Samsung has the Exynos 2400E. Both processors are built on 4nm architecture, and in the Geekbench tests I did, the numbers were quite similar with the OnePlus scoring a little higher. As for internal storage, neither phone offers SD card support. The Samsung starts with 128 GB of storage and 8 GB of RAM, while the OnePlus starts with 256 GB of storage and 12 GB of RAM. The Samsung can go up to 512 GB with 8 GB of RAM, while the OnePlus can go up to 512 GB with 16 GB of RAM. The cameras offer a very similar experience with a 50 megapixels main sensor on each. The OnePlus has a 50 megapixels telephoto lens, while the Samsung only has an 8 megapixels telephoto lens. For the ultra-wide, the OnePlus offers 8 megapixels, whereas the Samsung offers 12 megapixels. The Samsung can record in 8K at 30 frames per second and 4K at 60 frames per second with both its front and rear cameras. The OnePlus can record in 4K at 60 frames per second with its rear camera, but only reaches 1080p with the front camera. Speaking of the front camera, the OnePlus has a 16 megapixel sensor compared to the Samsung's 10 megapixels. Both phones support Bluetooth, but the OnePlus has Bluetooth 5.4, while the Samsung has 5.3. Both phones offer an in-display fingerprint sensor, but here I'd give the win to the OnePlus because it's much more effective. On the battery front, the OnePlus has a larger battery with 6,000 mAh compared to the Samsung's 4,700 mAh. The OnePlus also has faster charging at 80 watts, while the Samsung is limited to 25 watts. A comment I'd like to make: it's not that I want to compare these phones to an iPhone, but at least in terms of design, they are very similar. Both feel quite comfortable in the hand. Here you can see them next to the iPhone 15 Pro Max, and the Samsung is almost identical in terms of design. The Samsung is even closer to copying the iPhone design than the OnePlus. The feel in the hand is also quite similar. Now, my experience using these devices in terms of software is very similar. Both offer plenty of customization. With the Samsung, you can download different apps from the Samsung store to customize it extensively. But the OnePlus also offers its Oxygen OS layer, which allows for equally impressive customization. As I mentioned earlier, the fingerprint sensor on the Samsung is terrible. It doesn't recognize well and is slow, while the OnePlus does a great job. Another downside to note about the Samsung is that the bezels around the screen are quite thick. In contrast, the OnePlus has extremely thin bezels around the screen, which aesthetically looks much more appealing. In terms of performance, as I mentioned earlier, the two phones have different processors, Exynos versus Snapdragon. It's always been said that Snapdragon processors provide better performance. The results, above all, are said to be better in terms of gaming. I tested both devices by playing the same games, Call of Duty and another game you will see. Honestly, both gave very good results, even with the game settings on maximum. So, I couldn't tell you that one processor is better or superior to the other, but it has always been said that Snapdragon is better in theory. On the other hand, in terms of cameras, both devices offer manual modes. However, I have to give it to Samsung, as the Samsung offers a manual mode for photography, but also for video, which is very important for those who want to use their phone as a main camera, especially if you plan to get into YouTube. You can do that with your phone. The OnePlus offers a manual mode, but it's only available for photography. For years, OnePlus has offered manual modes, but unfortunately, they haven't released it for video yet. However, how much would this really be a reason to choose one over the other? I wouldn't say it's a very important reason, because today there are apps like the Blackmagic Camera, which is free and can be downloaded for both Android and iOS, and it offers thousands of manual functions. As we mentioned earlier, in terms of fast charging, OnePlus takes the lead. Also, when it comes to battery size, if that's your priority, OnePlus is definitely the better choice. You get a much larger battery and extremely fast charging. Now, keep in mind that this phone comes in its box, if I'm not mistaken, with a 55-watt charger, but you can buy separately an 80-watt charger to use with the OnePlus. So in terms of battery and fast charging, OnePlus will give you better results. Now, let's take a look at some examples of photos and videos we've taken with these devices. I would say the following. First of all, the ultra-wide camera on the Samsung is wider than the one on the OnePlus. And in terms of video recording, as I mentioned earlier, it's a shame that OnePlus didn't release this device with the Snapdragon 8 Gen 3, which has the capacity and power, because they haven't even given us 4K at 30 frames per second on the front camera, only 1080p at 30 frames per second, which is a huge disappointment for this device and its power. Meanwhile, the Samsung does have 4K at 60 frames per second on the front camera. One thing to mention, though, is that when you want to record with the ultra-wide lens in 4K at 60 frames per second, unfortunately, neither of these two devices offers that. In fact, to record in 4K, you can't even do it at 30 frames per second with the OnePlus using the ultra-wide lens. You have to switch to 1080p to record with the ultra-wide lens. Unfortunately, 4K resolution is not available with the ultra-wide lens on the OnePlus. And with the Samsung, you can record with the ultra-wide lens, but you'll have to drop to 4K at 30 frames per second. 4K at 60 frames per second with the ultra-wide lens is not available, which is a shame because obviously the premium series from Samsung, the S24, does allow 4K at 60 frames per second with all their lenses. Now, in terms of photography and video, as you can see in the examples, I'd say the quality and HDR of both devices are quite similar. On the other hand, for low light and night photography, both do a good job, but I got the impression, I'm not sure what you think, but in some examples, it seemed like the Samsung retained a bit more detail in the photos, especially in low light and shadow conditions, but they are very close. The portrait mode, when I took pictures, seemed like the subject separation from the background was better on the Samsung than on the OnePlus. On the other hand, the bokeh effect on the OnePlus seemed a bit exaggerated, blurring almost everything behind the subject. Maybe you can adjust that in the camera app, but I took the photos in normal mode as they were from the factory, and I liked the Samsung better. Regarding video recording, they're quite similar, but I feel the Samsung introduces less noise than the OnePlus in low-light conditions. I also felt the OnePlus tended to overexpose more, especially if there were lights or something bright in the background. The Samsung did a better job, but in general conclusions, both are very good devices. What I can say is that, in my opinion, it's quite noticeable when you zoom in on the photos to check the detail. As you can see in the examples, it's clear that the quality isn't the same as what you'd get from a high-end or premium device. Up to a point, this is the consequence and price you pay for going with something more affordable. You might not get that premium detail in photography from high-end smartphones, but between these two devices, I would definitely recommend the Samsung. You can record video in 4K at 60 frames per second on both the front and rear cameras, and you can even record in 8K. On the other hand, you can record in 4K at 30 frames per second with the ultra-wide lens. You have manual modes for both photography and video. The OnePlus doesn't allow you to record with the ultra-wide lens in 4K, not even at 30 frames per second. The front camera is still only 1080p at 30 frames per second, and it doesn't have a manual mode for video recording, only for photography. Both devices are priced similarly, around $450 to $500 for refurbished, used, or open box versions. In general, for what you're paying for these devices today, I would rather recommend buying a high-end premium version, maybe open box or used from a year ago, like an S24 Plus or a OnePlus 12, which could cost around the same as these. If you buy these phones new, there you have it, friends. I hope you enjoyed the video and liked it. If so, give it a like, share it, and follow me on Instagram. See you later with more videos. Keep partying like a rock star. Life is short. Enjoy it.